This year, this is my year, our year. Can you feel it? More motivation. 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 Synergy. 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 Adventure. 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 Responsibility. 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 Intimacy. 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 Achievement. 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 Advancement. 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 Determination. 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 Focus. Focus. This is my year.
Honey, so? What do you think?
Yeah.
Motivation, integrity, determination, synergy. Come on, honey. You're not even listening to me. I mean, I have a poster and everything this time. This is perfect. I mean business. Jack?
This is my year. I promise.
I just can't get enough of that. Well, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. How you guys doing on a Saturday night? Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us online. If you're online, I got a question for you. Are you very familiar with this phrase right here, gently used? Anybody familiar with that term? It's funny because we used to just say something was used. It's either new or it's used, and now there are levels of used. And like gently used. Gently used means I bought it new. I took it out of the box, but I never really used it, and I don't think I'm ever gonna use it. So it's really more like an open box thing, but it's gently used. And you can get some really good deals on gently used items, right? Gently used things. And some of the best deals of all time are on gently used fitness and exercise equipment. Have you ever noticed this? Like it's everywhere. And when I say gently used, I mean, you see it and you ask, did anyone ever use this? And the answer is not really at all. And in fact, now the truth is, I try to buy everything used. I really do. I'm a cheapskate. I buy my cars used, my computers used. I try to buy my clothes used. I even buy my running shoes used. So here's what I found out. So I'm a runner. I run a lot, and because I run a lot, I want to have good running shoes, and they can be kind of expensive. And I go through them a few times a year, and so. One of the things I notice is if I go on eBay, I can almost always find my shoe dirt cheap, gently used, because somebody on their New Year's resolution decided, I'm gonna get fit, I'm gonna start running. Of course, I'm gonna buy the best of the equipment so I can do this. And then they ran around the block one time and realized that they actually hate running. So they threw them in their closet. A year later, I'm scooping them up at a third of the price because they're gently used. And some of you have bought and sold things like that. Like it was a great idea, and then you got it, and then you realized you were never going to touch it. And a year or two later, you're getting rid of your gently used items. And one of the interesting things is that the original purchasers purchased that item because they were believers. They were absolute believers. They believed. We believed. We believed in fitness. We believed in exercise. We believed in cardio and health. And in fact, the reason why it's gently used and at such a good price isn't because we didn't believe, but because we never actually used it. We didn't actually do it, because when it comes to exercise, as is true in many of our areas of our lives, people don't act on what they believe. And so today we're in part 2 of this series called This Is My Year. I promise, because the past 2 years, we started out last week saying, have made it really easy to be, and here's this word I would never use of you, but others have used about themselves in talking with me, kind of made it easy to get a little lazy and to lose some of the better habits and rhythms and routines that have maybe been built in our lives, but like, not this year, this year's gonna be different. Finally, this is my year to regain maybe some lost ground or to get some things back on track. And last week we said something that you all know, especially in the arena of physical health, that believing in doesn't really make much of a difference. In fact, in most areas of our lives, believing in something is not what makes the difference. What is it that makes the difference? It's the doing. And in fact, it is what you repeatedly do, which is the definition of a habit. It is what you repeatedly do that really makes all the difference in life. And in fact, this is so true. You can actually exercise with a bad attitude. Anybody ever done this? Like you just had this terrible attitude and you didn't want to do it and you did it anyway. You can exercise not believing that it's doing you any good, and it still does you good. It still does good because it is the doing, and especially what we repeatedly do, the rhythms, the routines, the habits that we build into our lives that really make all of the difference. And that's true in many areas of your life. But there's another thing that's true about exercise. And some of us have experienced this, like some of you who exercise, or some of you who used to exercise or do something and then you stopped because somebody you did it with moved, like somebody moved or you moved or something happened to that friend group and you're not really around those people anymore, or they closed your gym, or you changed jobs and now you don't really see those people anymore. And isn't it true that having a partner or like another person, maybe some of you have hired trainers for this very reason, or maybe a group that's involved in that activity, that makes a difference as well. Isn't that really true? And some of you are looking at me like, what? You can do this with people, right? Like it actually makes a big difference. It's so much easier to talk yourself out of exercise or anything healthy, frankly, if there's no one waiting on you, no one expecting you. And like those mornings, you would probably just sleep in and hit the snooze again, but he's going to be there or she's going to be there and they're waiting for you and they're counting on you. And if it's a team sport or a group activity, like they're all going to be there and they're going to wonder where I went. The community, the people that we're with, the community actually counts. The people that we're with can make or break a habit or a goal or an objective that we set for ourselves. And there's so much definitive research on this. In fact, last week I referred to this book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. And he unpacks this idea that there's this deep primal need we all have to belong. Like it's hardwired into our instincts. We care about what other people think of us, even though we protest that we don't care what anybody thinks. We actually really, really do. We imitate the habits and the behaviors of the people around us. And we take our cues, and especially we take our definition of normal from our tribe. We take our definition of normal from our tribe. It's like people like us do things like this. This is who we are, and people like us, this is normal, right? And so he gives a bunch of examples, like if you hang out with a bunch of jazz musicians, playing music 5 nights a week will just seem normal. What? Yeah, it'll just like, that's what people do. If all of your friends are successful entrepreneurs, starting up businesses from scratch, then starting a company or starting a business and all of the habits and sacrifices and the costs that go into that, that will just seem normal. If you hang out with a bunch of people who want to have a great marriage, and they're always talking about that and working towards that, that will actually seem normal. And if you start partying with all your divorced girlfriends out of high school, clubbing and dancing every Thursday night, girls' night out, and they've all left their husbands and families, then leaving your husband and your family will just seem normal. And I've seen that happen a number of times. And so then James Clear, he draws this conclusion, he draws this application that is just so good. He says, here's what you want to do. What you really want to do is you want to find the group and then join the group where your desired behavior is their normal behavior. That's what you want to do. You want to find that group and then join that group where your desired behavior is their normal behavior because we imitate the habits and the behaviors of the people around us. And by choosing your tribe, you end up choosing your habits and choosing your outcomes. It's the proximity principle. The proximity principle says this: in order to do what I want to do, I need to be around people who are doing it in places where it is being done. In order to do what I want to do, in order to be who I want to be, in order to go where I want to go, I need to be around people who are doing that, who are becoming that, who are going there in places where that is normal, where that is being done. And as you might have guessed, because you're sitting in church right now, all of these dynamics of like, it's not really what you believe in that really makes the difference, it's what you do with what you believe, and the proximity principle that your community actually counts, these dynamics, these principles are true of our faith journey as well. In fact, the more you try to wrap your head around Jesus and the life and teachings of Jesus, the way of Jesus, and how his first followers understood that and processed that and talked about that, the clearer it becomes that you cannot follow Jesus. You can't do this stuff, the Jesus stuff, in isolation all by yourself. That following Jesus really is a team sport. Following Jesus is a team sport. In fact, the Apostle Paul, and you probably have heard of Paul or St. Paul, the Apostle Paul, what you may know is that Paul actually steps onto the pages of history as a Jesus hater and a Christian hunter. That's right, he was actually part of the group that had Jesus killed. And then a number of years later, as the Jesus movement won't stop, he's hunting Christians and trying to have them killed. And then Paul has an experience with Jesus after he had been killed that changes his life. The resurrected Jesus. And you might be of a place in life where you're like, I'm not really sure I believe that, or I don't think a person can rise from the dead. And I understood like the pushback, that I get that. But there is no doubting historically that Paul believed that Jesus rose from the dead and that he had a personal experience with the resurrected Jesus. Changes his life, completely changes his life. And he goes from Christian hater to hair on fire Christian, like Jesus freak. And he starts to travel around the Mediterranean world, starting these communities of Jesus followers and talking to people about Jesus and building these communities together and then writing them letters. And when Paul talks to people like us about what it looks like to follow Jesus in real life, he emphasizes again and again and again, this is a relational thing. This is a together thing. This is a collective. This is an us and we thing, never a solo, me, myself, and I kind of thing. And Paul, for all that we know about him, and we know a lot about him, and for all that we can read about him and all the letters we have from him, and we have a lot of letters from him, Paul never talked in terms of God saving individuals from their individual sin to live more personally actualized lives with Jesus as their personal life coach. You know, you can do it. It's never just this personal individual thing alone. This is a really, really big deal, by the way. Really big deal for Paul. God was not just saving individuals. It was bigger than that. God was saving humanity. And he was saving humanity and restoring humanity, redeeming humanity to one another, not just to God. And the one another, the collective, the together, the community was actually an essential part of what God was up to. Not just essential to you, and it is, but actually somehow essential to God, which is why when you read Paul's letters, he spends just a completely disproportionate amount of time and words and energy on the community, on how people are doing together, like how the relationships are going and the things that are getting in the way of that and the way that we are to be together with one another in order to show the world what God is really like and what he's up to. And this is really captured like a snapshot kind of way throughout Paul's letters and actually all of the first followers of Jesus with what are sometimes called the one another's. The one another's, and there's dozens and dozens of them in the documents written by the first followers of Jesus that are collected in what we call the New Testament. But here's what it looks like, Paul says, and here's just a quick snap. This is a partial list. He says, here's what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. Forgive one another, encourage one another, accept one another, submit to one another, care for one another, restore one another, bear with one another, because one another can be hard to get along with sometimes, and carry one another's burdens. Like, how's that? What does it look like? Oh yeah, forgive one another, encourage one another, accept one another, submit to one another, care for one another, restore one another, bear with one another, carry one another's burdens, and on he goes. And Paul would say, if you're a Jesus follower, this is what it actually looks like in real life. It's all about one another, to which I think we as modern American, like Christians, we say, oh, no. I thought it was like, well, I believe. I mean, that's really, like, I believe and I go to church or maybe go to church. That's suddenly become very non-essential. And I pray. I mean, that's important. And like, try to be nice, maybe give a little money, read my Bible. Like, isn't that it? And Paul would say, no, that's not it at all. This is it. This is what it looks like. And quite obviously, you can't do any of this alone. Now, this whole thing is a really big deal to me because I was raised in a version of religion, of the Christian religion, that was very vertical. It was very, like, morality was vertical. It was all about God and what made God happy and what God wants and what God thinks. And religion and faith was very vertical. It was all about believing in God and praying to God and reading the Bible. And being a good Christian was really about right morality and right beliefs. And as long as you had that, like, you believed the right things and you behaved yourself, then you could be pretty sure that God was good with you and that you were good with God. It's like, it's me and God. It's just me and God, me and God, me and God. God, are you good? Because I think I'm good. Are you good with me? Because I'm good with you. And it's that whole, as long as me and God are good, then me and you doesn't really matter. Like, that's not even part of the equation. And this is a real problem. This is a problem because though the vertical is important, and though morality and what we believe is important, it shapes who we are, they are far from summarizing or capturing what Jesus was all about and what following Jesus is really all about. And in fact, it sets us up to be self-righteous and to be somewhat self-important and even self-focused. And if you have a purely vertical orientation, it actually sets us up for all sorts of spiritual deformations, if you will. Things like legalism and cynicism and elitism and judgmentalism and separatism and me firstism. And have you ever heard of this one? God's gonna get 'emism? Ever heard of that one? Yeah, God's gonna get them. Yeah, that's right, because we're the Christians and they're the sinners, or we believe the right things and they believe the wrong things, and it's us versus them, and so you need to stay away from them because God's gonna get them-ism, right? And I was actually kind of raised like that. This is a bit of how I was raised, and then I walked away from all of that, and then I made a decision in a drug rehab to follow Jesus, and that's when I began to really follow in earnest. And I seriously wanted to learn more and discover more about the real Jesus. And as I began to just dive into the stories and the biographies of Jesus and the writings of his first followers and how they had processed that, I discovered, actually kind of to my surprise, and it was to my pleasant surprise, that this wasn't true at all. I mean, Jesus did not say stay away from those people because God's going to get them-ism. Jesus, it was the opposite. Jesus was almost always found right in the middle of those people who he did not refer to as those people. And he's constantly dragging his students, often kicking and screaming, into the middle of them with him. And Jesus lived and taught and really emphasized, put exclamation points on the fact that the way our deep love for God spills out into the way we love one another and the way we love our neighbor and the way we love even our enemy, even people who seem opposed to us, is actually part of our love for God. That is actually part of the way that we show our love for God, that the vertical and the horizontal were inseparably related to the spiritual life, to what it looked like to love God. And so to get at this, as Jesus' first followers picked up on this and then just put it out again and again, I want to take a look at a section of a letter that was actually written by one of these first followers of Jesus, found in the documents that we refer to sometimes as the New Testament. It was written by a follower of Jesus who is anonymous. The letter is anonymous. We actually don't know who wrote this particular letter. And more than a letter, it's actually a written sermon or a written speech, which is a super common thing, that speakers or philosophers or writers would write a speech and they would send that out as a letter, because you think about it, like, there are no podcasts, there's no YouTube. You can't send somebody a link like, hey, you need to watch this. And so things like it would be written down and then copied and passed around. And so this particular sermon, if you will, is written by a Jewish background, or you might say Hebrew background follower of Jesus, to other Hebrew background followers of Jesus. And it's so packed with good stuff that eventually becomes included in the documents that, again, we call the New Testament. But what I want us to notice as we take a look at just this little section of this letter is how this particular author, how quickly he pivots back and forth between the vertical and the horizontal, the vertical aspects of faith, the horizontal aspects of faith. Like, it's not either or, it's both and it's completely integrated. So check this out. We're jumping in late in the letter. You need to know that. This is not the way to read anything, like jump in at the end. A lot has already been said. And in fact, in this little part of the letter, he's summarizing a bunch of those ideas and then turning towards application. So here's where we're jumping in. Hebrews, the document is known as Hebrews chapter 10. And here's what he writes. He says, therefore, because he's wrapping some things up, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place. Now, he's writing to Jewish background Jesus followers who knew what this was about. This is a visceral, very, very emotional, personal thing to them, because the most holy place referred to the Holy of Holies that was in the temple in Jerusalem, super special. Only the high priest could ever go in there, and that only once a year. And after certain rituals and cleansings had been performed, it was like the ultimate expression of God's presence on earth. But he's making the point in this letter that because of Jesus, we have direct access to God's own personal presence. So without a temple and without the priestly system and human mediators and without any further sacrifices at all, the direct access has been opened to the very presence of God. And he says, by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way that's opened for us through the curtain. And he's referring to the curtain, or this large, very thick veil, if you will, that actually separated that holy space from more common space so that people couldn't see or go in there. And he's saying that curtain that separated doesn't separate anymore. It has actually been opened, and you can come right into the presence of God. And the way that it's been opened, the way through that curtain, is actually the sacrificial death and resurrection of Jesus, God's Messiah, that he has brought forgiveness and healing and redemption to everyone so that anyone can walk right into the presence of God. Now, he's unpacked this at more length earlier in the letter. He's just summarizing that. Since this is true, he says, and since we have a great priest, and he's referring to Jesus, and he's summarizing a big deal earlier in his letter. Since we have this great priest over the house of God, let us. And the writer of Hebrews uses that particular phrase over and over and over again. It's constant, let us. It's never, well, you should, and you need to, and you need to do this, and you need to try. It's always us. It's always us. It's together. In other words, this is something that we do together in a way that we can't do alone in the same way. He says, so let us, here's what we do, let us draw near to God. And here's the vertical part, right? The way has been open for you to draw near to God with a sincere heart, he goes on, with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience. And again, he's summarizing things he said earlier in the letter. And so you're pure and you're clean, and you don't have to do anything else to walk into the presence of God. And again, it's very vertical. The way that we collectively relate to God and draw near to God, he says, like, let us do that. And then he says, and let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. Here's the second thing that we do together. We remind each other of hope. We remind each other of the promise. We remind each other of God's faithfulness, that he's here, that he's with us. And you may believe that on your better days, and you may think that that's true on your better days, but without some one another's, without some one another's around you, that's real easy to forget sometimes. And we can begin to swerve or waver in our hope. And it happens so quickly in isolation. And so he's like, it's vertical, and now you can relate directly to God, and you don't need the temples and the sacrifices and the priests. You could just draw near. So let us do that. And you can be certain that God is with you and that he's for you. But down here on planet Earth, and like the rough and tumble of real life, we need people who can remind us, who can hold on to hope with us, and sometimes hold on to hope for us when we are losing our hold on hope. And don't we lose our hold on hope sometimes? And so there's this vertical, but it's integrated with the horizontal. And now he just pivots fully from vertical to horizontal. And he says this, and let us consider, that is, let's give some thought to this. Let's put our heads together. Let's ponder. Let's get creative. Let's have a brainstorming session. Let's consider what? Consider what? Well, let's consider how to spur one another on, how we might spur one another on. And here he's pivoted from this vertical, like spiritual relationship with God, I'm close to God, I'm drawing near to God, to a very tangible, real as the person sitting next to you or in front of you, behind you right now, horizontal, relational application. Spur, he says, which is like prod, like poke and drive at and push someone to and provoke someone to. It's like, so we're to spur one another, we're like poke and incite one another, like to what? Because some of us are like really good at spurring and poking and pushing people's buttons and provoking them to something. Like, what is it that we're to spur them towards? Well, you're to spur one another towards love and good. What's that word? Say that word out loud with me. Deeds. To love and good what? To love and good deeds. Not to good believing or good behaving, but good doing. Like, this is belief turned into action. What I believe turned into what I do. This is vertical turned into horizontal. And we're like, well, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I have my own personal, private relationship with God. I've got a clear conscience. I'm behaving myself. Me and God are good. And the writer of Hebrews would say, hey, that's great. I mean, seriously, that's great. What are you doing? What are you doing? How are you, and specifically, what are you doing with and for one another, for the others? Because it is the doing, and especially the doing together, that really makes a difference. And chances are you are not going to be doing very much if you are not doing it together. We talk about this all the time around here. We talk about something we call collective generosity. And it's this idea that there is so much more that we can do when we pool our resources than any one of us ever could or would do alone. And that's just true. That is so true. Over the years, we have done some incredible things, but only because we did them together, that it was a together thing. And we love and help people that no one of us would or could ever do alone, and we do far more together than any of us would even think of or probably enact alone. People like us do things like this. It's just normal. It's normal to serve this way. It's normal to give this way. It's normal to care this way. It's normal to jump in this way. And chances are you are not going to do very much for very long if you don't have a community. If you don't have a tribe, if you don't have people who are spurring you on to make progress, to keep moving ahead in your faith, to spurring you on, sometimes by what they say and sometimes just by proximity, because proximity matters to become more loving and to do more good. And then the writer of Hebrews just gets way up in their business and way up in our business, and he adds this thought: you spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up, meeting together. Like, you can't afford this. You can't afford to avoid together. And you think it's all about vertical and like you're good with God and your personal, private, personal relationship with God. It's not. It's together. And if you think, he's saying, now he's talking to them because he sees something in them that's very normal, it's very human. He sees some of them struggling with the cost of following Jesus. This is the context that the letter is written in. And they're being persecuted and they're being opposed, and it is hard. And it's causing some of them to pull out or to pull back or to take a step away from the community, the collective, the together, the one another's. But he could just as easily be talking to us. Because COVID did a number on us. I can isolate like never before, and it's actually totally cool and understandable. Like, I can get everything I need delivered to my house. I can get everything I need spiritually just online. I can watch that. I can tune into that. I can listen to that, and I can be alone and isolate myself, and it's not going to change anything about me and God, is it? Now, don't get me wrong. Online is great. And if you're watching online, I'm not judging you. I really am. Online is great. I'm grateful that we have it because you know what? Online is a great supplement, but it is a terrible substitute for together. And it is not at all a substitute for community. And he's saying to them, if you think you can do this alone, If you think you can be alone and avoid together, if you think you can substitute the tribe, the community, the people, the collective for your personal vertical relationship with God, you're not only wrong, you're actually missing the point. You're actually missing part of the point. And if you opt out of together, it will not only impact your faith, and it will, trust me, over time, but more importantly, or at least just as importantly, it'll impact the Jesus movement. It'll impact the movement, it'll impact the community, and it will impact God's dream. And so the writer of Hebrews is like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Some of you have actually stopped gathering together. Like, what are you thinking? Not only can you not do this thing we're talking about solo, thinking that you can, and trying to completely sabotages the point, this redemptive interpersonal movement in the world that was divinely designed to be a one another movement. And then he concludes so powerfully, not giving up meeting together. He says, as some of you, I heard some of you are in habit of not gathering anymore, but here's the contrast, but encouraging one another. But encouraging one another because every follower of Jesus, and straight up every human being, right? Every follower of Jesus and really every human being needs to be in a one another community where you are being encouraged and you have the capacity and the ability to encourage others. And that word encourage is a great word. You know what encourage means? It means to put courage into somebody. That's what it means to encourage someone, to put courage in them, to put courage in them. And why do we need that? And why do you need that? Because it takes courage to live this life well. It takes courage to go against the path of least resistance, which is the gravitational downhill flow of anything in your life. And if you ever want to go against that, to do something other than that, it's going to take some courage in your life. It takes courage to be gracious when people are ungracious, to be forgiving when you're hurt, to be understanding and patient when you're disappointed and let down. It takes courage to be generous when I got stuff I want to buy with my money. It takes courage to be selfless in this self-centered world, and it takes courage to live out your faith like authentically and honestly and humbly and graciously and respectfully in a world that does not necessarily respect that or view life in the same way. It takes courage. It takes courage to live this life well, and at the same time, day-to-day life has a way of sucking the courage out of us, doesn't it? Of taking courage from us, of beating us down, of taking the wind out of ourselves. Life has a way of being discouraging to us, and therefore we all need to be regularly, habitually in environments with people for whom this is normal, in places where people are doing this, that actually just put courage back into us. They remind us of hope. People around us who are sticking courage back into us, and at the same time, we desperately need to learn how to be those kinds of people ourselves. And if you're going to follow Jesus, it's not just vertical. It never was. It is horizontal. It's about being in a community, a bunch of one another's, some relationships, some together with other followers of Jesus, so that you can be encouraged and that truth can be spoken into you and hope can be spoken into you when you need it, and even when you don't want to hear it. It's so important. And so as we wind down, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you a question and get you thinking about this, because we're starting a new year. And here's the question. Do you have that? Do you have those one another's? That group, that people, that community? Do you have one another's? Do you have people in your life? And this is an important, like we could riff on this for a little while. I'm not going to for the sake of our time. But outside of your immediate family, that's actually that's an important disclaimer. Do you have people in life other than your immediate family who do this for you, who spur you on to love and good deeds, who spur you on to living out your faith, encouraging when you need it, and even when you don't want it, who have the right and have earned the voice to do that in you, and for whom you can return the favor? Does anybody have permission? Does anybody have permission to talk to you this way? Is there a setting, a place, a context where these kinds of things happen and come about naturally as a matter of course? Because it is so true, the proximity principle is so true, that in order to do what I want to do, in order to be the kind of person that I want to be, in order to go where I want to go, I'm going to need to be around some people who are doing that. And I'm going to need to be regularly in places where that is normal, where that is being done. I need to join the group where my desired behavior is their normal behavior. Now, two real, just immediate, very in front of us right now applications of this principle for this year. And by the way, this applies to so many arenas and areas of our lives. And like you can go off and kind of think through those for yourself. But two very immediate applications of this principle. And the first one is this. This is actually why we value gathering every single week. Like every 7 days, every week, gathering together, it inspires us, it keeps us on point, it reminds us of stuff that we know and forgot. It's the community that reinforces for me personally who I want to be. I'm like, that's right, that's who I want to be, whether I'm singing these songs or having conversations, it's like, that's right, I forgot that this week. That's who I want to be. It's normal to be crazy generous. It's normal to make God's love famous. It's normal to serve people with nothing coming back to you. It's normal to be humble, to apologize when I've stepped on somebody's toes or offended someone, even if I think I can defend myself. It's like, it's normal to just swallow my pride, and because people like us do things like that. That's what we do. People like us, this is what's normal for us. And I need to be reminded of that. And that's why we value this practice. And the writer of Hebrews says, you need to make that your habit. And don't make not doing that your new habit. You need to make that a rhythm and a routine in your life. And the second thing is, and so that's more like an immediate deal. The second one is, this is why we value small groups. Now small groups take this to the next level, because you can still be pretty vertical here. Like you can pop in and pop out and like kind of not really engage horizontally, but you engage vertically and it helped. And you were in an environment where certain things are normal and you wanted that to be normal, and that's good and that can be helpful. But being in a small group is like me saying, I'm going to get myself into a smaller, like face-to-face group where people are doing what I want to do. And they're thinking like I want to think, not always, but like that's that general direction, and they hold normal things that I think I want to have normal in my life as well. Now, we are in small group or life group sign up month. Our spring life groups have been signing up all January long, and hundreds of you have already jumped into life groups. Like, thumbs up, way to go. Groups are actually beginning next week. And if you haven't already signed up, I want to challenge you to jump in today. I mean, this is not exactly the last call, but it's kind of like the last call. Jump in, sign up today. Around you, not in your program, but around you on some of the chairs, there's brochures. If you push one out of the way to sit down, grab that and fill that out. If you don't have one next to you and you don't want to bother the person sitting next to you to get one, you can sign up on your app if you have the Terra Nova app, or you can just go straight online. You can do so right now on your phone and just go to ourterranova.com/groups. Really easy to remember, ourterranova.com/groups, and sign up for a group. Hey, if you're a young mom, we started a new group this spring called MOLO, Mothers of Little Ones. You need to jump into that group. Or if you're a single parent, you need to jump into that group for single parents. Don't do this alone. You were not meant to live life alone and to face life alone. Jump in a group. And if you have already signed up, like, awesome, way to go. It's great to sign up. It's even better to show up. Now, every time I say that, people kind of chuckle like, yeah, it's true, I signed up, I never went. I'm actually not talking about that, though that's actually good too. I mean, show up. I mean, like, you show up. Your real self, my real self. I bring me to this group, and I show up with my questions and my doubts and my struggles and my answers and my hope. I have both things going on in me all the time, and real people do. And so you just bring your real self and you say, I'm going to show up. My favorite conversations are when we're reading something and somebody's like, yeah, I don't really get that. I mean, I understand the words, the meaning of the words, but I don't know. I mean, I don't really see it that way. Or that's when it starts to get fun and real, and I think impactful for everyone. So if you sign up, that's fantastic. But really show up and press past some of those initial barriers and be a one another for the one anothers around you, because the Jesus movement isn't just vertical. It's not just about the individual and your personal salvation and your personal Lord and Savior. It is not just about you and God and me and God, but not you and me. It's I'm doing this thing and all the other parts are just interchangeable. It's like, no. It's not like that at all. It's about you and me and God, and you and me being in the kind of community that reflects the beautifully diverse wisdom and creativity and redemption and reconciliation of the God who loves this whole world so much that he sent his son for us. And this will be our year for that. This can be your year for that, and we will pick it up right there next week with part 3 of our series. Don't miss how we wind everything down. Let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for your big, beautiful vision for us. It's so much better than just an individual personal thing. It's so much more fulfilling. It's so much more real to be bound together and connected to each other and to belong with one another and have to work through things together. And as we do so, our lives and our characters are shaped for the better. It's just such a beautiful vision. And so I pray for all of us, myself definitely included, or maybe myself first, that as we enter into this next year, we would bring our real selves to one another, and we would bring a devotion and a love to one another that reflects just how much we love and are devoted to you. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, well, that series is coming up in 2 weeks from this weekend. And so as we mentioned a little bit earlier, we've got these invite cards. These are for us to take with us and not to hold on to ourselves, because I bet that there are people in our lives that they go, you know what, I'd actually be curious to do that. I'd actually want to know a little bit more about who Jesus is and what it looks like to actually follow him and what it originally looked like. And so as you head out this evening, you want to grab those cards, stick them with you somewhere where you have it easy just to access. And as those people and those opportunities come in front of us, we just want to be ready to step into those. And so I'm excited for that in the next couple weeks ahead of us. Hey, as we wind down today, a couple things to remind you of. First is the Connect card. Talked about this a little bit earlier. Again, if there's a way that you need courage right now, there's a way that you need somebody to bear a burden with you or just to be with you in life, let us know. Let us know how to pray for you. Let us know how to care for you. Let us know anything you want to talk to somebody about. But we would love to hear from you, especially, again, if you're a guest with us today. We'd love just to be able to follow up with you, and thank you for being our guest. And as we talked about, last call for life group signups, and if you haven't had a chance to do that, now is a great time to do so. And one of the things that we talked about, people like us do things like this when it comes to being a community that is focused on being as generous as we can, and how different that looks when you consider the ways of what's normal in our culture. That's something that we love to embrace. And so for those of us who say, hey, this is my community, I want to be part of the reason why we do things like that, we've got the opportunity to give, and we've got an offering envelope, and we can always be given online or the Terra Nova app just to be able to step into moments to do things like that. Well, great. As you're heading out, anything that you want to leave behind, we've got our guest services teammates who are at the door, and so you can drop those things in there. But I want to make sure I invite you back next weekend as we jump into part 3 and the finale of our series called This Is My Year. Hope to see you back then. Thanks again for being with us today. You guys have a great week. God bless. See you soon.